Hello and welcome to Blender Bite Size. In this tutorial I'm going to show you how to make this scene, including a procedural rocky planet, procedural stars and also volumetric clouds. Feeling lazy? You can support this channel and skip the hard work by grabbing the blend file for this material from Gumroad for just £1. Feeling flush? Feel free to throw some of that coin my way using the coffee link in the description below the video. Okay, let's take a look at the scene layout. First of all, I have my planet, and that's this sphere in the middle. Then I have this larger sphere, which is going to be the Nebula clouds. I've then got a sphere off to the right, which is not visible in the camera view, which is going to be a single star. And we're then going to use that to populate a very large, cube, but a stretched out cube, using a particle system. I've then got some lighting set up. I've got lights that will light the left hand side of the planet, a light that will illuminate the right hand side, and then a light coming from the rear that will illuminate the rim. I've then got an empty set up to track all of those things too, and that is set up here and tracked using this, so track 2. Okay, so let's switch over to the shading tab and enable viewport shading and make a start. Now, our volumetric cloud sphere is going to block everything, so for the moment we are going to hide that and focus just on the rest of the scene. Let's make a start by adding the material to our star. Now I've got my crop to render region and render region on, so that's the star that we're focusing on. I'm going to add a new material. I'm going to delete the principled node, name this star, and then add an emission shader. And I'm going to plug that directly into the surface, and you can see that's happened. And I'm going to give it just a slight yellow tint. Now, not much is going to happen in the scene just yet. That's going to happen when I apply this star using a particle system to the cube at the back. So let's select that, and you can see it's very elongated. I've got it stretched out to the left because I wanted to animate it like it was a scrolling field of stars. So we need to be in the particle system tab over on the right for this. And we need to add a particle system. We're going to set it as an emitter, type the number as 100, and make sure it's set to the end of the frames, and I've got 240 at the moment. Make sure you increase that and the lifetime if you want your stars to be present the whole way through your animation. Now for the source, emit from, choose volume, set this distribution method to jittered, choose random order and deselect or turn off even distribution. Make your way down to the render settings, and we're going to set that as object. We'll set the scale to 0.075. Then in the instance object, we can click on this box and it will reveal everything we can choose from. So we choose star, or alternatively we can just use this eyedropper, click on that, move it over the star, or indeed the star in the scene collection, and click, and it will set it to star. Next up we head down, rendered, material 100%, show emitter, and we are going to, on the extras, choose all 3 of these, parent particles, unborn and dead. Okay, so back at the scale, let's just increase that a bit. In fact, no, let's go back down and change the scale randomness to 1. And we'll leave that as it is for now. Next up, we're going to go over here and switch to world. We're going to increase the strength to 50. And for the color, we need a noise texture. So Shift A and search for a noise texture. Take the color into the background. Add a color ramp. And we're going to move the white value to 0.83 and then the black value, let's say 0.65. Now we can see something happening there, but it's not quite what we want yet. So we're going to increase the scale to 500, and you can see now we've got a scattering of stars all the way over. Increase the detail to 15, leave the roughness at 0.5 and set the distortion at 0.5. And we need to add a mapping node and a texture coordinate node. So I'm just using the Control-T shortcut that you get with Node Wrangler. That's an add-on that you enable through your preferences. Alternatively, you can just Shift A and search for both of those. Make sure the object value is connected to the object output. And it's good, but I need to crunch it a little bit more. So crunch it until you've got a scattering of stars. That'll do me. Now they're out of focus at the moment because I have the depth of field activated in my camera. So if I do that, you can see they're much sharper pinpoints of light. It's up to you whether you use depth of field or not. In fact, I'll leave it off just for now until we get sorted. So let's just use Shift equals to align those, make them nice and neat. Again, a shortcut with the Node Wrangler add-on enabled. So that's our world and our extra stars available to us. We're going to switch back to object mode and go and select the planet. And we need to add a new material. Now the first node that I'm going to add is a Musgrave texture. And I'm going to plug that into the base color, the specular, and I'll come back to the other one. We're going to need another one of those, so I'm just going to Shift D to duplicate that there. And I will add a mapping node and a texture coordinate. Leave it on generated. Plug the vector from the mapping node into the second Musgrave texture and add a mix RGB. Now for later versions of Blender, this is now just called mix, and then you have to select the RGB option within that node. So just look out for that, it's catching a few people out. I'm currently using Blender 3, so I think 3.4 now has this new node type. Plug the second Musgrave texture into color 2 of that and leave the factor at 0.5. We'll come back and change some of the other values shortly. Now between the first Musgrave texture and the principled shader, we're going to add a color ramp. And we need another one of those as well. So we'll bring that on. And plug the first Musgrave texture into that also. Grab yourself a displacement node and plug the color value from that into the height. We're not going to plug that in yet, we'll come back to that. So what have we got? Right, let's start getting the values sorted in these. So for this bottom Musgrave texture, we're going to set the scale at, oops, hang on, we need to change this to rigid multifractal, and that's the type. Change the scale to 0.8 detail to 15, dimension to 0.3, that funny one, lacanarity, yeah, to 2, offset to 0.025, and gain to 120. And we can already see we've got lots of detail going on there. For the first Musgrave texture that we put down, again change that to rigid multifractal. Change the scale to 2, detail to 15, dimension to 0.3, leave that set at 2, offset to 0.025, and again the gain all the way up to 120. And now you can see we've got a very convincing rocky planet, just with those values. Now for this color ramp, we're going to move the black value in to 0.2 and the white value in to 0.8. And that gives us more intensity between the black and white regions. And this is also where you would control the overall color. So you'd set your dark value here and your light value here. So if I wanted something a bit more like, maybe let's say Mars, let's choose a darkish red or a brown even there, and let's go and get us a slightly warm red. So there you go. Not bad, huh? Now let's see the changes we need to make to the principled shader. The roughness we're going to increase to 0.95, and everything else I think we're just going to leave as is. So it looks good so far, but I want to bring in this displacement, so let's bring that down. And let's change the color ramp to constant, mid-level to 0, scale to 0.005, and let's plug that into the displacement. Now up close, you're probably not going to see a huge difference, but if we make a couple of these changes, let's move that to 0.1 and increase the value on this to quite a light grey. Let's say, would that work? 0.75, maybe a bit less. 0.5, yeah, let's go for that. Now, like I say, on when you're zoomed out, it's not going to make a huge difference, but when you zoom in, you are going to start seeing good quality displacement for the rockier areas of the design. Let me just increase the max samples on the viewport render. And that's giving us slightly better. Yeah. So there's the planet itself. Obviously, call that material planet. So in essence, these two control the sort of fine details for when you're going in. So if you're just doing it from this kind of zoomed out region, you probably don't need to add these because they're just going to increase the amount of pressure on your graphics card. And then this collection here is going to control the actual detail of the planet itself in terms of the topography. Yeah, let's call it that. Let's just isolate those so you get a better idea. So we've got this one that's given us all these cracky wavy lines. That's mixed with the mapping node and then fed through the Musgrave texture again to give us much more detail. We then add the color with the color ramp and then some fine tuning with the principled shader. And that's as simple as it gets, really. Now then, let's talk volumetrics. So we need to add back in the nebula and add a new texture. And for this one, we're going to delete the principled shader and add back in, add in a principled volume node. Plug that into the volume, not the surface. So already we can see a difference. Now we've got a fair few things to add here, so let me just chuck those in quickly. We're going to start out with a noise texture. We'll come back to that in a minute. A Musgrave texture and a Voronoi texture. I'm also going to need 3 color amps, so let me add 1 and then just duplicate 2 more times. Now this Voronoi texture, we're going to take the distance value and plug it into all 3 of those. We're going to take the height from the Musgrave texture and plug that into the vector of the Voronoi texture. We're going to add a mapping node and a texture coordinate to that. And that should be coming from the object value. And that's not right. That's going to go into the noise texture, which is then going to go into the vector of the mapping node. And we then also need a layer weight node. We're going to take the object value from the texture coordinate, plug that into the normal of the layer weight. And the color ramp from the top goes into the blend value of that. And then we're then going to use the Fresnel output, plug that through a mix RGB node. Via the factor, and that is going to control the density of the cloud. Now we need some more things to add to that. We're going to add a brightness and contrast node. That's going to be controlled by the second color ramp, and the brightness contrast node is going to come into the color 1 slot of the mix shader. We're going to set color 2 as black. And then this last color ramp is going to go into the color slot of the principled volume. Right. Let's start making some updates to the values here. So let's isolate the noise texture. And we're going to change that to 4D, and this will help us animate it later on if we want to. But the scale we're going to change to 1, detail to 15, roughness to 0.75, and the distortion to 0.13. And you could see the changes happening there. Isolate the Musgrave texture. That is going again to be 4D. In fact, so is the Voronoi texture, so let's do that anyway. W value I'm going to set at 1.1 as the start. Scale 1.75, detail of 5, dimension of 5, and lacunarity of 5. Isolate the Voronoi texture. So everything so far that's coming into this Voronoi texture is being applied here. Scale here we're going to leave at 5 and randomness at 5. So let's go back to our main volume shader. Now, like I said, we are controlling the density with this color ramp, this layer weight node, and this mix node. So we need to make some changes here. I'm going to set the interpolation mode to constant. We're going to set the alpha on the black to 0 and move the white value to 0.123. Now that's taken some stuff out, but you can see it adding back in some of that detail. Let's bring back some of the alpha. 0.5. Yep. Now for the second color ramp, we are going to again change that to constant. We're going to set the first node to white and the second node to white, and then we'll add one in the middle, move it up a bit and set it to, let's say 0.5 when it comes to the grayscale on the value. Now we can see more detail coming back into that cloud now. For the brightness and contrast, we're going to increase the brightness to 0.85 and the contrast to 10.35. And again, that's bringing back a lot of the detail in that cloud. And then for the final color ramp, again, a constant value. We're going to flip that around so the white value is at start and move the black value to 0.5. And that's going to knock back some of that color. Now for the principled volume node itself, we are going to change the anisotropy to -0.9. And we are going to leave everything else as it is. So that's the node tree as it stands. Obviously you can play around, change whatever values you want to see if you can get the look that you want. In terms of color, I'm not 100% sure where I would be changing that at this point. Actually, that's a lie. Probably here. Oh, there we go. So yes, change this white value here to change the color of the cloud. Oh, I learned something while I was teaching you. That's good. Right. So, when it comes to rendering it out, there are a few changes and a few things for me to point out. So let me go through those with you. Now I'm obviously using cycles for this because of the volume and obviously my graphics card. Max samples, believe it or not, we can get away with something quite low, which makes it very fast to render. Just make sure that you, oh sorry, not viewport, render. Something quite low, set your minimum samples about half of whatever your maximum samples are and activate the denoise. It's up to you whatever you use depending on your graphics card. Albedo and normal seems to add to the effect. For light paths, I'm using the default values, as you can see here. For caustics, I'm going to turn off refractive. I am going to enable fast GI approximation. I'm going to enable simplify. I'm going to use tiling and set the value at 256. And then for the color management, sRGB and medium to low contrast, you might get a slightly better look to the planet with slightly higher contrast. That is really up to you and how you view things. When it comes to the lights, I'm going to make a couple of changes as well. For the rim light, which basically is coming from the back, we're going to go down to the light value. We're going to set it to 1000 watts and Might actually just change this colour a little bit. Set it to yellowish colour, a bit like the sun. Set it to an area light with a disc shape 3 meters, cast shadow multiple importance, and a spread of 45 degrees. For the right hand light, which is coming in this way, just a low light, 50 watt, again an area light with a disc shape. Spread it out 10 meters though with a spread of 90 degrees. And then for the left hand light, slightly more powerful, 750 watt, area light, disc, 10 meters and 45 degrees spread. For me, that gives the optimal type of lighting for this scene. And then the camera, again, like I said, we can go for depth of field if we want. Set that to around 2.7 and your empty that it's tracked to at the front of your planet. That will then blur out everything behind it. Now, I don't think there's anything else for me to show you there, so let me render that out. Oh, sorry, the rest of the camera settings are here, by the way, so if you're not sure, 51mm focal length. This is all going to really depend on how your scene is set up and where your camera is, so I'm sure you'll figure that out. Let's send this to render and just take a look. And there we go, there's our planetary scene with the larger stars that we created in that cube, together with the volumetric clouding and the planet. Now, from what I've heard, oh, that took around 15 seconds on my graphics card, by the way, and with those settings. Now, from what I've heard, volumetrics obviously do tend to slow things down. So if I turn that off, I then get a render time of 3 seconds. So you can see there is a big difference. I could then, of course, increase the number of samples that I used. Let's go for the 4096, which is usually the crazy, and turn off denoise, which is usually the crazy high thing that Blender defaults to. Okay, now that is much better from my point of view. Without the volumetrics, with the high sample count, it did go up to 1 minute 15 to render that, but as you can see, we've got much more detail in the stars themselves. There was quite a lot of random stuff with the denoising going on, and much more detail in the planet itself. So if you're looking for animations, maybe look at a balance between the volumetrics and the sample count. If you're doing still images, then maybe a higher sample count and, I don't know, ditch the volumetrics. It's entirely up to you. I hope that's given you some ideas, though, of how to build your own solar system, at least with rocky dead planets. But there you go. Anyway, I hope you found this video useful, and we'll leave it a thumbs up. It was a bit longer than my usual videos, but I wanted to do an entire scene for a change. Of course, subscribe for future content if you would like to see more from me. And in the meantime, thanks for watching.